gang of roustabouts are cutting up cinema like it's never been cut up before. There's going to be reviews. There's going to be interviews. There's going to be hijinks. And there's going to be a whole lot of cutting in this room. The Cutting Room Movie Podcast. Coming at you 128 kilobytes per second.
Hey everyone, you're listening to the Cutting Room Movie Podcast, episode 94. As always, as usual, I'm your host, Tom Detloff. With me tonight, Mr. Joe Christiana, the counselor, Adam Shoulder, and finally back behind the microphone here at TCRMP, Mr. Billy Barassa. I gotta stop everything and just say hello to Billy real quick because it's been a while. I'm very excited that he's on for the next couple weeks. Billy, how the hell are you, my man?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Oh, it's going quite well, actually. Really, I'm very excited to have you on, to hear your voice. I'm sure a lot of people out there are excited as well. We're doing stand-up comedy, Bill. You know,
yes,
stand-up comedy films, and I did the picks here. We're doing Misery Loves Comedy tonight. This is Kevin Pollak's 2015 documentary. Next week, we're doing the classic, The King of Comedy, which you're going to introduce. And we're also doing Frank Whaley's little bit of, I guess, labor of love, you could call it, The Jimmy Show. So things are going to be really cool. We'll be able to talk a little bit about stand-up comedy, I'm sure. Billy, let me ask you this real quick before we get started. The stand-up comedy, do you have a love for it?
I revere stand-up comedy. I love stand-up comedy like you can't believe. So I just wish I got out to see more live shows.
Right. I know it means so much to me too. I think it means a lot to all of us. More than we realize. And I think one of the things that I admire most, and among many things, but just that, that willingness to get up on that stage and to try to make a connection, with the audience.
I think you could make an argument that it's one of the purest forms of art because it's literally one person talking, and that's it. Right. There's no special effects. There's no music.
There's no instruments. Right, exactly.
Nothing, it's just a human being talking. And
unless you're Andrew Dice Clay.
Or Carrot Top.
Or Carrot Top.
Or Andy Kaufman.
Yes, well... He took it to somewhere.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Amazing,
it's an amazing art form, and there's been so many, just legends from the beginning. From people who changed the idea of stand up, like Lenny Bruce and guys like George Carlin, and then and Richard Pryor. You have that that whole scene there, and then we have. Just so many outrageous characters from the 80s and 90s, and it's just you're right, Billy. It's it's a really impressive art form, and it's something that I think we'll have a lot of fun talking about in the next couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll be able to sit back and chew on some of our favorites. Hopefully we get to turn each other on to some guys that maybe we're not even aware of, which would be really cool.
Tom, did you pick this topic in particular because, you just said it's sort of near and dear to your heart. I just wanted to know a little bit more about why stand-up comedy, why you chose to dedicate a show or a couple of shows to it.
Yeah, it's just something really different. I think that I was watching some, some stuff recently, some stand-up, and it just it occurred to me that there were many, many movies that, are about stand-up comedy. The three that we're doing the next 3 weeks, there were just so many more that I could have thrown out there. I tried to do something a little bit different with the Frank Whaley thing, because it's such an unknown film. Mm-hmm. The King of Comedy, of course, was a decision made because we've never even talked about Martin Scorsese on this show, which is just crazy. And the newer film is just something I thought would be great because I thought that the film would get into more of a darkness, that these guys go through, which, we'll talk about obviously in a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, it's just something that's been with me since I was a kid. I mean, staying up New Year's Eve, watching HBO all night, all night. I mean, they would just run show after show from like 9 p.m. to like 6 o'clock in the morning. And, when you're 9, 10 years old watching that, at first you're just watching it for the profanity. But after a few more years, you really start to get into the ideas behind each and every one of these guys and what they're about and how they see the world. And the fact that, we laugh because we're making this, we're both realizing something with the comedian. It's like we both know this and he's saying it for you, or he or she is saying it for you. And I think that's just a beautiful, beautiful sharing of energy.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Well, it's a great topic. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Awesome.
And happy to discuss Misery Loves Comedy.
Let's do it.
He's a mysterious cyborg who won't stop boasting about his brand new backyard bubble tub. A chemical zombie who just had a bionic eyeball installed in his skull. No joke. Lock up your Latin daughters, for Adam's shoulder, a.k.a. the Counselor, has arrived.
In 1993, my good friend, Stefan Marks, approached me with an idea. But first, a little bit of backstory. Stefan is an award-winning playwright and director who has penned and staged around 20 productions in the 25-plus years I've known him. He's been gracious enough to cast me in 9 of his shows over the years. One in particular was called Chet Well, and I had the good fortune of playing the titular character. The show was a one-man show, a 2-hour-long opus. It's about 60 full typewritten pages, done in the style of a get-rich-quick seminar where Chet discusses his presto method of success. However, the high-strung and hypomanic Mr. Well gradually becomes more and more unhinged as the show progresses, eventually suffering a complete nervous breakdown on stage and ending up in his underwear having lackluster phone sex with his wife. For me, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as an actor. It was harrowing and exhausting and exhilarating and extremely, extremely creatively rewarding. A few years later, Stefan wrote a prequel, and I resumed the role of Chet at another theater here in Los Angeles. And after that, I thought my days of inhabiting the persona of Chet Well were well behind me. But now it was the summer of '93, and here was Stefan approaching me about a new incarnation of Chet. Small, 5-minute monologues to be performed as a stand-up routine. The performer in me jumped at the chance, but I did not know what I was getting into. Several weeks later, I stood pacing, sick to my stomach, in the back halls of the legendary Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard in the heart of Hollywood. I was overwhelmed with anxiety. Making matters worse was the fact that there was some event going on that night in the next room, and a steady stream of A-list actors and comedians were flowing in the front door. I could feel my stomach acids churn. I was given a blur of instructions from someone about a blinking flashlight in the back of the house to indicate my time limit. Holy shit, that's Danny DeVito over there. Stefan tried to give me some notes about something, but wait, there goes Michael Richards. What? Wait, where am I? Did they just announce Chet Well? They did. Okay. Well, now, how did I get up on stage? Did I walk up here on my own volition? The MC said something about my tie. I know I said something back. Holy fuck, what just came out of my mouth? What am I saying? The sweat, the lights, the monologue, the blinking flashlight, the steady flashlight. Was I done? What, did I do it? I did. I had somehow got through my first ever stand-up performance. And I bombed. Big time. And why not? The idea may have been ill-conceived or ill-executed or a little of both. The true humor of the character of Chet Well came from getting to know him during an evening of theater, not in 5-minute machine gun bursts of non sequiturs done in a shrill southern drawl. I made no connection with the audience whatsoever. Yet we tried again, this time at the Improv, and I bombed worse. And with that, I was done. I swore off stand-up of any kind and had a newfound respect for anyone with balls big enough and skin thick enough to endure the life of a comedian. And it is the life of the comedian that actor-director Kevin Pollak explores in his documentary Misery Loves Comedy, as he attempts to discover if one needs to be fundamentally unhappy in order to be funny. Pollak amasses a notable array of celebrities, from stand-up comics to actors to writers to directors and, yes, even podcast hosts, and gets them to discuss topics such as their family's influence on them, other performers that have inspired them, their best moments, their embarrassments, their failures, and their thoughts on the question serving as the thrust of the documentary: does unhappiness in fact engender better comedy? The documentary is very entertaining, as the people being interviewed are an inherently entertaining crowd, and much of what they discuss is fairly interesting. However, I believe Pollak may have missed the mark on truly delving deeply into what could have been a more provocative and meaningful exercise. The fatal flaw is that the vast majority of the interviewees are terribly successful people. Most have had long and successful careers with great financial and creative rewards. Now, don't get me wrong, I fully understand that money and success do not negate unhappiness. There are universal problems that we all must at times suffer. I understand that true depression does not discriminate, and often there are those who mask their pain too well. One only needs to think of Robin Williams to understand that. However, if Pollak is going to take the time to really explore this issue, then gathering a bunch of his successful friends to sit around and tell stories may not be the best way to accomplish this goal. Entertaining, yes. Probing, insightful, and revealing, not so much. Perhaps the closest Pollak got to really getting to the core of the question were the segments featuring Freddie Prinze Jr. Here was someone who could give a different perspective on how a comedian can be a truly broken soul. While he was only a baby when his father, the star of a hit sitcom in the 70s, put a bullet in his own brain at the height of his career, his interview was by far the most real and the one that came closest to hitting the nail on the head. Had Pollak opted to interview family members of his comedian friends, their wives, their kids, their siblings, even their friends, maybe we would have had a better perspective on the topic, a better peek behind the curtain than offered by the comedians and actors themselves, a self-admitted attention-seeking group pontificating on the thought of misery's influence on comedy. But then again, maybe Pollak didn't want to go too deep, because then it wouldn't have been as funny or entertaining as it genuinely was. I liked hearing about the trials and tribulations, the challenges and inspirations of some of my favorite and respected actors, directors, and comedians. Pollak kept it light and fun, but in my opinion, never really cracked the surface of his main question. Perhaps comedian and podcast host Mark Maron said it best when he noted that one does not have to be miserable to be funny, but it helps to struggle a bit. I couldn't agree more. I think of how many great directors made some of their best work when they were young. Budgets were small and creativity solved problems, not money. Think of some of the early roles of great actors when they had something more to prove and couldn't rest on name recognition to get them by. Struggle is often the mother of invention and can fuel the creative machine in ways no other can match. But struggle does not need to equal suffering. Struggle does not need to be painful, nor is struggle negated by success. Struggle can inspire and challenge and push us to be better and to try harder. And with the right set of eyes, struggle can be funny. So who really knows what makes people funny? But I have a theory. I think being funny is survival of the fittest. It's pure Darwinism. It's an example of adaptive problem solving. I personally learned early on, in elementary school in fact, that being funny got me attention, but more specifically, it got me attention from girls. Once my young brain made that connection, once I understood that making women laugh was one of the greatest natural aphrodisiacs on the planet, my course was set. I didn't need to be a jock or look like a guest model or be a rock star to get girls. I just had to be funny. I just had to make them laugh. Many of the comedians interviewed discussed this as part of their own experience. Making people laugh helped them to fit in. So perhaps the answer to Pollak's question is being funny comes from the basic human instinct to survive and to procreate, an adaptive technique to ensure the survival of one's own bloodline. I am personally convinced of this fact, but truth be told, it's not nearly as interesting and not nearly as funny.
Thank you, Adam. 2015's Misery Loves Comedy, directed by Kevin Pollak. Kevin Pollak talked to over 50 of his Hollywood, I guess, friends. And what did we get out of this? I mean, that's the question. I think, Adam, going back to the beginning of what, you were talking about this film, is that I expected to really get like a darker sense of where the comedian might come from. And Pollock, like you said, keeps it very light and fluffy, and it just doesn't have any kind of real depth whatsoever. And the title's certainly misleading. I mean, if you're gonna, do a documentary and say that it's dedicated to Robin Williams of all people. Let's get real here. Let's get down and dirty with some of these guys. He completely just misses the target on that one, and I just found that it was like almost at times just watching these guys on a late night talk show. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think some of those clips were actually from. Didn't Kevin Pollak have some kind of talk show?
Oh, he might have.
He does. He has a podcast. It might be a video cast.
I think it's a video cast. And when there were a few interviews there were some lower res thing. I think that was just pulling that from his show.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, so he just obviously compiled all this footage and probably,
his intentions were probably good.
Yeah,
I think that when he gets his pals in the room and there's two funny people in the room, it's difficult to keep to maintain the seriousness. I'm sure that you have two comics in a room, they're going to start trying to make each other laugh, especially when the camera's rolling. You know what I mean? So I think probably his intentions might have been to do exactly what he stated to set out to do. It's just not the easiest thing to do.
And that trickles all the way down to post-production, and you get into editing, and suddenly, well, that's a funnier line, so let's use that. And you get further and further away maybe from the topic, and it just becomes funny.
But if first of all, he didn't need 50 people in this documentary. Let's just, he could have cut that down. And like you said, Adam, that what? You're right, that Freddie Prinze, the Freddie Prinze Jr. segments, they're the best, and I can't stand that guy. Like, he's just to me he's just obnoxious, but that was to me the realest part about this documentary, and that's what I going in to this film with this title and what was, I thought, how it was described to me, by IMDb and whatnot, that, we were going to look at some down and dirty aspects of, the comedian's mind. And it just never hit that mark for me, man. I kind of got bored with it. But, especially hoping to get that. Listen, it's always fun to listen to these guys talk. I mean, obviously, they're celebrities, they're successful comedians, they're funny people, they're great directors, they're great writers, blah, blah, blah. But I just think that what he's advertising here is not what is what he put on film.
Don't you do you think that if it was called something else, like maybe he shifted it mid-gear and just realized that, he's not diving into it, that if you take away your expectation, I mean, it's not a mind-blowing documentary, but it's still, like you guys were just saying, it's still entertaining.
Of course it is, because look at what we has on there.
They also they get into a lot of nuanced stuff about the whys and the hows of comedy that I actually thought were pretty illuminating, even if it didn't get as dark as it was advertised, or as it, I guess, claimed to.
Well, it's Misery Loves Comedy, Joe. I mean, just the title. You don't have to go further than that.
But isn't that kind of ironic anyway? I mean, like they title shit all kinds of crazy things. Like it's a cute witticism, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not. I don't know. I didn't go into it expecting that it was going to be like plumbing the depths of darkness. But I think that subject is overmined anyway. Like everyone's really fond of saying how miserable stand-up comics are, and it's kind of a self-promotion thing for some comics too. But the thing that I love about comics is that they, whenever they ask that question, they kind of roll their eyes and crack jokes at you, So
right.
I really enjoyed it, man.
Cool.
But I didn't go in expecting that it was going to be like the depths of misery explored or anything.
Yeah, I just thought it was going to be deeper. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I was kind of disappointed that it was kind of fluffy to me, and I thought
it could have.
I thought it could have been edgier. That's all. Like that's basically what I'm saying. Listen, I mean, it was 90 minutes of interesting talk. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And like I said, you throw 50 people like that together. I mean, just one of them for 90 minutes talking would be interesting, quite
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, that's why they're comedians, they can stand up there and be interesting for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
And he's one
Yeah.
of them,
I mean, it's totally an enjoyable, whatever it is, 90 minutes of footage, you know what I
Sure.
mean? So it's definitely worth the shot. And I actually think that the point that I guess the documentary makes through the interviewees is that, yeah, so comics are miserable, but no more or less so than the rest of us because
Yeah.
comics' job is basically to hold a mirror up to, any artist really is to hold up a mirror to you in one sense or another. And if they weren't reflecting back at us our own, misery, but also our, all the other stuff that comes into it, everything else, anger and all
Yeah.
those other things, then we wouldn't go and see them, because they're human. That's what they're doing. So of course they're miserable. So with the rest of
Is
us,
a singer-songwriter more miserable than the average person? Is a writer more miserable than the average person? Like, nobody who does any job. Is a plumber more miserable than the average person? Humans are just sort of miserable. Like, the thing about being an artist of any kind or a crafts person of any kind is that it's just your job to cast that in some sort of form, for everyone to look at and go, ah, ha, ha, that's right. That is how we are, So
you're just saying that we're all equally miserable, Billy.
I think all of us, when we are at parties and get drunk and tell stories, what stories do we usually tell? We usually tell the worst things that happen to us, and we laugh about it because that's what we do. So I don't even think that the question of are comics more miserable than anyone else, I don't think it's that particularly interesting. I just think he threw it out there because he wanted to see what kind of answers he would get from all these people, and that becomes interesting because I want to hear those stories.
Right. I got you. So you were. You were entertained by this film, Billy, right? I mean, it's like we're saying, it's not the best documentary, but it's
it could have had more shape. I felt like as just the structure of the film could have had more shape for sure. There were certain periods where I was like, okay, it's cutting around and I'm hearing stories and I'm kind of getting bored because it's just sort of, skating around right now. But yeah, I mean, any chance to hear those people talk, and like there were so many people, how he knows all these people and gets them to, come on the movie was pretty awesome. I mean, everyone from Christopher Guest to Tom Hanks to, like I was pretty blown away actually.
Yeah, it's so cool too, and you're right to have all those people on. It's like sometimes, you get you're reminded of how great somebody, especially a guy like Christopher Guest, who just doesn't like pop into your head as often as he should. I mean,
he seems like a recluse to me. Like he's just
right,
not a recluse, but just disinterested in promoting himself.
Right, he's so great. Like, I mean, It's so funny that you mentioned Christopher Guest because a couple of weeks ago, I watched his film The Big Picture, which I hadn't watched in a while, which I think is just a spectacular movie. I mean, it's really funny. I mean, if you're a filmmaker or, especially a young filmmaker, I mean, The Big Picture is something that you should definitely watch because it's just so perfect. And Guest does the great mock documentary thing, with his other films. So it's just great to be. Even James L. Brooks, I tend, as great as he is, he pops in and I forget, geez, I mean, this guy has really made some wonderful pictures, So it is cool to see a lot of these guys. Some of them, I never heard of. Joe, were you turned on to anyone new watching this documentary?
No, well, I didn't have enough time to like go and investigate people, but today I did kind of troll around YouTube, and based on some of their discussions, I checked in on Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah.
Again, wow. I haven't heard. I watched an early Dennis Miller because I hadn't seen his stuff in a long time, and then I started watching some Sam Kinison, and then I got So I went back to some of the stuff that those guys were talking about, and I really dug it.
But you knew of Mitch Hedberg.
Oh yeah,
okay, cool.
Yeah, it's like every once in a while, every couple of years, every couple of times a year, I'll go be in a stand up comedy kind of mood, and
Right.
get out, get trying to check in on some of them. But to what your guys' point is sort of delving into the darker side of that. And Adam, I really dug your point there, man, about struggle and not suffering necessarily being sort of this motivator for art, and I guess comedy in general was really awesome. And I think that if you want to hear about all these comics being getting into their darker sides, and and some unknown comics, check out Maron's show. I know I've suggested it to you before, Tom.
Yeah,
but
that's what Mark Maron. He really needs a plug from us, Joe.
I know he doesn't need a plug, but
he
just
needs
as
it. Go ahead. Let everybody know where they can
it's
find
not a
Mark
plug.
Maron, please.
I'm just saying, man, you'd enjoy it. So I think that his stuff is really great, man. It's really intimate, and because of it's not condensed down into 90 minutes of 50 people. He sits down and he will get a lot out of these comics and what's going on, and also other artists. So. Really, really interesting stuff.
I would love to listen to podcasts, Joe. I just don't want to get influenced by any of them. Once this ends, I'll probably go on a podcast frenzy. I mean, I listened to a podcast. I listened to the Bret Easton Ellis podcast a few weeks ago, and that was like the first time I ever did that. But I really just couldn't help myself, and for some reason, I mean, it was like the weirdest show that I was attracted to. It was like Matthew Modine talking about his time with Stanley Kubrick, and it was like a full podcast to listen to. That's
So you're worried about hearing other people doing what?
Yeah, I don't.
Doing.
Yeah, I don't want to be sitting here going, "Hey now," and I just don't want to get influenced by other fucking people.
Well, you see that now. I still miss your intro, Tom.
Which one is that?
The one you let go of.
The screaming and yelling intro.
Yeah. I like that was your. No one else was doing that. That's your thing, man.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. Why is that gone? Why is that gone now?
I just thought it was time to stop screaming.
To retire
like that.
it.
I just felt like, I don't know. How can I explain it, Billy? It didn't feel good anymore doing it. You
just needed a new haircut. You were just tired of the old haircut.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason why any one of us, besides Max, of course, needs to really be screaming at the top of his lungs.
Well, one is enough, I suppose.
I get this a lot, though, in my business, guys, which is weird. And I don't, it's nice of people to say, but I don't think that they realize, how beyond difficult it is to do stand up and to write stand up and to perform it and to perfect it. And I mean, this is something that takes years and years and years, and some people make it, most people don't, obviously. I mean, that's how it is in most creative industries, especially artistic industries, entertainment, so on and so forth. But I get this a lot because I could be working and I'm waiting on the table, and somebody always said, this happens at least every couple of weeks. Somebody says to me, either, "Are you a stand-up comedian?" or "You should be a stand-up comedian." And as nice as that is to hear, I think to myself, I'm like, man, this person really doesn't have an idea of how difficult it is to do something like that.
Do you have any idea how difficult it is? I mean, have you tried it?
No, I've never tried it, but I mean, I've talked to a couple of stand-up comedians, and I watch, I mean, just look at, just like I don't need to be one to assume even to put a film together is difficult or I've made a film and I've done music, Joe, and
just to write something.
Of course, I've recorded, a musical, a record with my brother Jeff. We had a band, and, I made a really crappy film, and I put a lot of heart and passion into it at the time, but I knew before doing both ventures that it wasn't going to be easy. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you could just poof, and something miraculously happens, I mean, it takes a lot of work, and stand-up comedy. I mean, I couldn't even possibly imagine how to even go about sitting down even just to start with a piece of paper to throw those ideas down and to juggle the words around.
I mean, is it something? It sounds like something that you've considered. I mean, is it something that you would maybe want
I've
to
never
do?
considered it. No, I've never seriously whatsoever considered it, at all. And anytime that I've pondered it, like I just quickly realized that it's just not something that I could do. I don't write well enough to do something like that, and that, like, I mean, I could do
I
improv is, I could do improv better than I can writing something down, that's
yeah.
already structured. Like I could probably get away with, like, just, I'd probably be better off just being thrown on stage with nothing as opposed to being thrown on stage with something.
Jesus.
I'm dead serious.
I'd like to see that happen sometime.
I get it. I feel that.
Is that-
I see that.
Is that a dare to yourself?
No,
Tom?
no, none of this is. Listen, I'm just talking here. No, not at all. No, I mean, why, Joe? I mean, why? I mean,
Oh, I'm just curious. It sounds like it's something that's entered
Yeah.
your mind
Right.
there.
I
I
mean,
mean,
have
Tom,
you ever thought of that?
if you had 3 minutes of material, Tom, would you go to an open mic night?
If I had it,
Yeah,
like if it fell from the sky
Yeah.
and you had it.
exactly.
I could probably, if I had material written, yeah, I would probably, I
Is
could
it something
do.
you would want to do? Is it something
But
you'd want
listen,
to
I've
say?
been on stage. I've sang, my own personal songs on stage for 40 minutes. Like
All right.
dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I mean, probably like 100 times. And
That's
I
awesome.
mean, performance art is something that you're definitely interested in. Obviously, you're doing this, but running this podcast and stuff.
yeah, I've always been fond of the microphone. There's no doubt about it. Which is why, I guess I enjoy doing this, and why, I even made an attempt at singing songs. I mean, that was a great experience. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. I used to just, I mean, one of my favorite things to do when doing that was just to admire the other unknown acts out there. I mean, because it takes a lot to go up. I mean, you know that, Joe. I mean, you write music
Yeah.
and you hear Ronnie
Oh,
sing
yeah.
those songs, and it's a very difficult and
Oh,
powerful thing to do.
yeah. Well, showing, dude, there's nothing more nerve-wracking than film. Well, I mean, obviously there is, but having your film being shown at a film festival or something like that is just, it's just
And
good.
especially the infamous Boston incident.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that one, yeah, it was funny.
So,
It was the one film festival I was actually relaxed at, and it just
yeah,
fucking blew up in my
relaxed.
face. I was. It just blew up in my face because I was such an asshole. But, Adam, did you? So you went on in character
Well,
for?
yeah, exactly. Which is interesting because as I wasn't going up there doing my original material, it wasn't very personal. I was doing a performance, so it was more like performance art. It was more like an Andy
So did
Kaufman
they
kind of
know?
thing.
Did the audience know it was a performance, or did
No,
they believe that? Okay,
well, I'm sure they figured it out because it's such an extreme sort of character. His voice was extreme, the stuff he was talking about.
okay,
So I get up there and but it was like I'm introduced as Chetwell, presenting as this guy, and it's like this little 5 minute monologue of sort of his get rich quick ideas, and it's sort of like a 2 hour play condensed into 5 minutes. So
okay.
I think the audience just did not know what to do with that.
Was the audience was the character written explicitly to fail, like to bomb?
No, it was almost like it was like a little mini play where
Okay,
basically you're listening to a get rich quick seminar. So it wasn't like normal stand up either. It was like a
okay,
comedy monologue. But Stefan has a very unique style of writing to his that all of his plays, just the dialogue, very stylized. And I think there was just no connection. The audience had no idea what I was doing, and so that was part of what. And I'd never done anything like that. And it's funny because, like Tom, you're saying you get up on stage with nothing. I was in a comedy improv troupe for a year,
Yeah.
and I loved it. Loved it. Now, part of that is you're not up there by yourself. You're up there with people that you work with. So even though you don't have a script, you don't know what you're going to do, the level of trust that you build and understanding the timing and sensibilities of everyone you're with, you can create something out of nothing as a team. But when you're up there and like the play itself that I did, Chet Well, 2 hours on stage by myself, but it was theater, and to me, it was like the audience is coming to see this. They understand that this is theater, and it was nerve wracking as all hell, more so than any other show I've ever done because it was just me out there.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
no one to save my ass if I flubbed the line. No one like
Oh,
it's just
man.
and it's 2 hours and memorizing it essentially word for word. Uh,
Oh,
and even
wow.
other things like having phone sex in my underwear on stage and singing on stage. I mean, it was chaos and madness, but it was a blast. I loved it. This was so different because the audience was not there to see this character. They were there to laugh and get punchlines, and they understand the character. And I was so nervous that I just decided I can't ever do that again. It was way too nerve wracking for me.
I mean, did it feel high, like you were high? Like it sounded like what they were saying in this movie and what you were describing as you were approaching the stage was that it was like a drug and it was like a rush, even though you didn't, maybe you shot it into the wrong vein or whatever.
Well,
Uh,
in that case, no. In all the theater that I've done, live theater, absolutely, absolutely, it is exactly as they described. It is a drug. It's an adrenaline rush when you have a live audience and you are performing. And like I said, I've done a number of plays, 9 with Stefan. I played such cool, great characters, and when you know that you are affecting an audience in that moment and you're that energy, I mean, you're up all night after a good performance, you're buzzed, it's fantastic. And I've performed a lot on stage as a musician as well, in many bands, and a lot of times original music. And same thing, there's a nice rush and buzz from that performance. But
Oh, yeah.
no, I did not find that with stand-up comedy. I was completely sick and anxious and wanting it to be over and got no rush or satisfaction of any kind out of it.
Could you
Oh,
imagine,
man.
Tom, Andy Kaufman when he would do stuff like just read
Mm.
was it a Catcher in the Rye or something? For like people would come to see him perform, and he would just read out of a book for like four
And it's
hours
not
with
like
no
exaggerated
explanation.
either. Like he really
I
did that
know.
Oh,
stuff
yeah. You'd sing 100 bottles of beer on the wall all the
all
way.
night.
I
Yeah.
mean, just fucking with an
Yeah,
audience and just having them boo you and hate you. That has got to be,
that's a rush.
oh God,
He,
that is
he
insane,
must have
man.
got off on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're getting your kicks a whole different way if you're
exactly.
doing that shit.
Exactly.
Why do you think he turned to wrestling? Because that's he could. I mean he took that nonsense to
It's all
another
performance
level.
art. All
Yeah,
performance art.
exactly. I mean, he loved that audience hatred. Like he just. I mean, he lived off that. I mean, that's just. I mean, that's.
I mean, that's a self-destructive, I've been doing a lot of reading about narcissism, and
Hmm.
there is like obviously there's some element of narcissism involved in any performance art to one, degree or another. But that what Andy Kaufman does, and you go up there and you deliberately, draw the hate of people. I mean, that's a form of narcissism to the point where it transcends narcissism. Like it just like kind of just does away with any pretense of wanting to be loved and just getting attention. It's like self-destructive attention. Like even wanting positive attention is almost like needing it is almost self-destructive. Like what Andy Kaufman does,
Mm.
that is just something that even just does away with the pretense of wanting adulation and just going right for the self-destruction.
Yeah, I mean he's just mesmerizing. I mean, he's just a whole. I mean, Adam, that dude's a total case study, right? I mean, seriously.
Oh, yeah, fascinating, fascinating.
Yeah,
And, I remember just, in fact, talking about like inspirations at a young age. Andy Kaufman was a huge inspiration to me. And I also at 9 found a stack of my dad's George Carlin vinyl albums. So like those two
yeah,
guys were inspirational to me. And
yeah.
Andy Kaufman, I think, was someone that even at a fairly young age, my preteen, early teens, like I learned something from him. Just the idea of there is a certain comedy in fucking with people, but to also make a point and holding up the mirror in a slightly different way, I guess.
Before we end tonight's show, I wanted to just try to real quickly get an idea of when the first time we were all introduced to the idea of stand-up comedy, because for me, and I'll tell you what mine was, and I hope you guys could remember and give the audience a little something. I think it would be fantastic. For me, I mean, it was at a very young age, and probably 4 or 5 years old, I got my hands on a Steve Martin album where he was doing his routines, and it was the first time that I was introduced into stand-up comedy, and it was just so different and so exciting, and not to mention the fact that you're listening to people laugh at the end of everything that this crazy cat was saying. Steve Martin was I think my first introduction to stand-up comedy. That album, I can't remember the name of the album, but I remember it was, I think, in black, and the album cover was in black and white, and he had the I think the arrow through the head thing going on, which is just completely ridiculous. But Joe, do you remember what it might have been?
Two things stand out. I think the one that really most affected me was Bill Cosby himself.
That was early on, yes.
Yeah, they played that a lot on
right.
HBO, and I just remember
Mm-hmm.
really falling in love with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kid friendly, so
Absolutely.
you kind of understood what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
The other one was Robin Williams, and I remember when I was actually in 7th grade, I was in a friggin' theater program in my middle school, which was weird thinking about it now. And I haven't thought about this in so fucking long, man. And they I forget, it was something to do some kind of performance that you saw in a movie or on a TV show, and I was doing something, and I did a little bit of Robin Williams in front of the thing,
Nice.
which, God, it's so weird to think about that now, man. I haven't done that in so long.
Right.
Yeah, I think those are the two.
Those are the two, Billy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta go with Robin Williams.
Really?
I mean, yeah, because when I was a little kid, they used to play the Mork and Mindy reruns,
Mhm.
and then I was like, then I remember seeing Robin Williams on, like, obviously we didn't have cable when I was a kid, but it would have been like edited clips from his stand-up shows, and I was just blown away. I was like, there's superhuman energy. This was a long time before I would discover the word cocaine, but the watching his energy was just like, it was like pure childish id, bouncing around a room,
Yeah, he's extraordinary.
Yeah, he was amazing, man. He's just the mouth just moving at such a speed. It was incredible. So
he came onto that Happy Days set before Mork and Mindy. His first, his first appearance in a sitcom was on Happy Days, and he came on that set. They knew that character was going to be on that episode, and they were having problems casting the character. And he came in, completely just put the script down and just and improvised everything. And Adam, what's fascinating is that he, in improvisation and those guys being good actors, I mean, they worked with it and made something great happen, which is cool. And Billy, who's the other one?
Steve Martin was the one that I knew of him as a kid. I'd seen him in, like, he was always doing stuff with the Muppets and whatever. And then it wasn't until later that I started, like, sneaking, trying to see his shows when I was a teenager and everything, like, see the specials and listen to the comedy albums and stuff. And I was just blown away. Like, nice. He was the best.
Yeah, Steve Martin was, like I said, that was my first introduction. I used to love sneaking into my uncle's room when he wasn't around just to put that album on. And then as I got a couple years older, when I was like 7, 8, 9, I started to find his George Carlin cassette tapes, and I would, like, take one home with me and not let him know, and just listen to him. I'd sit outside and listen to Carlin on my tape recorder. I remember it was so weird because, like, he'd just be cursing the whole time, and adults would be walking by, and some little kid would be listening to George Carlin, with his profanity.
That's great.
Which is, like, he'd be sitting at the park, and
That's a great little short film right there.
Yeah, that's funny. Adam, what about your experience with it?
Yeah, it started with Carlin when I found. My parents had one of those old record players that was a huge piece of furniture, basically, and there was a built-in record compartment. And I was flipping through there one day, maybe 8 years old, and it was Toledo Window Box and Class Clown, and, like, one of them, Carlin's sitting there with, like, his making it look like his fingers halfway up his nose, and just like, okay, this looks funny, and I put it on, completely unsupervised, and then and I was hooked. Seven words you can't say on television, and on from there. And then I saw a movie called The Jerk, and said, well, this is the most entertaining I've ever seen in my 10 years on this planet. And sought out his albums, Steve Martin, Cruel Shoes, and I think Wild and Crazy Guy. I think are the titles of the two, like, the seminal ones of the late 70s, there, early 80s. And then right around then, 10, 11, 12 years old, I stumbled upon some Richard Pryor concert, live at Sunset Strip, and some other things that, that was it. Those three guys were absolutely it for me.
And the thing about Pryor, about that, especially live on the Sunset Strip. I mean, that's a film. That was released theatrically, in movie theaters, and you don't really get that too often anymore. Like you did, Pryor did it, and Murphy's Raw, right, was a huge theater hit. So you don't
in the 80s they all did that. I think Kinnison and Dice, they those comics became like rock stars. Like they were pretending to be rock stars, or they thought they were rock stars, or whatever the hell it was back then, And I think that wave started with Eddie Murphy, like you were saying.
Yeah.
He just
once Eddie Murphy wore a leather jacket, then everyone was wearing a leather jacket.
Even Dice.
Talk about dark sides. Friggin' Kinnison, man, that dude was manic depressive. I mean, he was just shot out of a cannon. I remember hearing him on the Howard show, and he's got that thing where he thinks that he's living in a legend. You know what I mean? And he's like, "This is history. This is history." Just friggin' like. He's almost frightening to behold the power of that guy.
Yeah. He was a. I remember seeing both of them for the first time, and again, when you're a kid, you're just, you're kind of laughing at the intensity and the profanity and stuff. But when you go back and look at their material, especially Kinnison's material, is just really, he gets really personal, Joe.
Yeah, I haven't watched. Yeah, I only got a few minutes into him today. It was just funny you brought up this question, Tom. And I was just thinking about how childlike stand-up comics are, like from one end to the other, as profane as they are. I mean, from Dice to Kinnison, Bill Cosby, Robin Williams, they're almost like cartoon characters. It's amazing how a kid can have relate to them so much, even if you don't understand what they're talking about, and even if you shouldn't be listening to what they're talking about. It's like you find a kindred spirit in a comic.
Well, especially when you're a kid, because adults aren't going to talk to you like that. They're not going to be really sincere with you. They're going to talk to you like you're a kid. And with the stand-up comics, like, and this is the important thing to remember, I think, when you're watching stand-up comedy, is that, like, he or she's talking to you directly. So you kind of feel like when you're a kid, you feel with them. You feel like you're an adult. You feel like you're being treated as an adult.
A whole flood of new information is hitting you, but at the same time, they're behaving almost the way that you would be behaving if you're throwing a tantrum or, dancing around like
down the street.
Yeah.
Well, their whole job description is to tear down everything your parents are telling you should be doing. Right? Like, the comics run around and just dismantle society's bullshit, this is like, hey, so a little light bulb goes on over your head. Like, hey, wait a second. You mean all this stuff they're telling me is bullshit?
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter. You don't even have to be a kid to realize that. You could realize that at 40, that your 70-year-old parents full of shit. I mean, like, Carlin would call people out all the time. It was genius.
Yeah, and just what Maron was saying in this documentary, which I think goes to just what you guys are talking about, is that he doesn't even care if he's getting a laugh. He's just got something to say. And what is great, or one of the great things about watching these comics, is that they're free thinkers, and sometimes they'll hide that in comedy, but the main point is that they're sitting down and looking at life and doing whatever they can not to be swayed by, prevailing consensus and what's being told to you is the right way to think about things, and they're looking at it in a way that's very childlike.
Right. Hey, listen, guys, we're running a little longer than usual, so I'm gonna I'm gonna cut it out here. But of course, we're coming back next week, and we're gonna be talking more stand-up comedy. We're gonna be doing Martin Scorsese's The King of Comedy and Frank Whaley's Labor of Love, The Jimmy Show, which is gonna be fun. We're also gonna get a chance to talk to Frank Whaley as well, which is gonna be awesome. Let me just start saying goodbye. I want to thank Joe Christiana, Billy Barassa, and the counselor Adam Shoulder for doing Kevin Pollak's 2015 film Misery Loves Comedy with me here on the Cutting Room Movie Podcast. You could like us on Facebook at the Cutting Room Movie Podcast, and follow me on Twitter, Thomas Detloff at TCRM Podcast. The music, as always, is done by the Zillatones, and the show is brought to you by Christiana Productions and edited by Joe Christiana. You can also check out Joe's film work at ChristianaProductions.com. You can check out Adam's pilot, Starland PC, at StarlandPC.com. And check out Max Cook's blog at MaxCookUncorked.com. Joe, real quick before we say goodbye, any more news on the book deal?
No, it's still waiting. It's going to go into editing soon.
Okay, all right. So you'll let us know.
I'll let you know when something's coming. But it will be released in August 2016. Awesome. So it's a little ways away. So.
All right, that's very cool, man, and we're very proud of you, man. You work so hard, and that's so awesome, dude.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, Tom, I'm unsure if you want to talk about this or not. Just real quick, a 5-minute thing about how you're feeling about the show, the future of the show. Max is in here. We don't have to put you on the spot. Are we moving forward with the show in the future?
Yeah, we have the rest of this season, and we got a whole nother season coming, Joe. So let's get excited about that. I think we're all very excited about that.
We'll leave it at that.
All right. And listen, I'd also like to thank for plugging some really big podcasts. What are they, Joe? Again, Mark.
Please go over to Mark Maron's podcast if you haven't heard about it.
And if podcasts aren't your thing, what was the big radio show you also plugged? Howard.
The Howard Stern Show. If anybody hasn't heard about that, I highly recommend it.
Get over there and check us out. Check them out, rather. I'd like also to remind everyone that you could subscribe to us on YouTube, which is a really great place to check out our show. We'll see you next week. Like I said, the King of Comedy and the Jimmy Show will be talking more stand-up comedy. We're over and we're out. Ciao.
Next time to satisfy more of your strange desires. The Cutting Room Movie Podcast. We do chicken right. Rouseabouts are cutting up cinema like it's never been cut up before. There's going to be reviews. There's going to be interviews. There's going to be hijinks. And there's going to be a whole lot of cutting in this room. The Cutting Room Movie Podcast. Coming at you 128 kilobytes per second.
Hey everyone, you're listening to the Cutting Room Movie Podcast, episode 94. As always, as usual, I'm your host, Tom Detloff. With me tonight, Mr. Joe Christiana, the counselor, Adam Shoulder, and finally back behind the microphone here at TCRMP, Mr. Billy Barassa. I got to stop everything and just say hello to Billy real quick because it's been a while. I'm very excited that he's on for the next couple weeks. Billy, how the hell are you, my man?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Oh, it's going quite well, actually. Really, I'm very excited to have you on, to hear your voice. I'm sure a lot of people out there are excited as well. We're doing stand-up comedy, Bill. You know,
yes,
stand-up comedy films, and I did the picks here. We're doing Misery Loves Comedy tonight. This is Kevin Pollak's 2015 documentary. Next week, we're doing the classic, The King of Comedy, which you're going to introduce. And we're also doing Frank Whaley's little bit of, I guess, labor of love, you could call it, The Jimmy Show. So things are going to be really cool. We'll be able to talk a little bit about stand-up comedy, I'm sure. Billy, let me ask you this real quick before we get started. The stand-up comedy, do you have a love for it?
I revere stand-up comedy. I love stand-up comedy like you can't believe. So I just wish I got out to see more live shows.
Right. I know it means so much to me too. I think it means a lot to all of us. More than we realize. And I think one of the things that I admire most, and among many things, but just that, that willingness to get up on that stage and to try to make a connection, with the audience.
I think you could make an argument that it's one of the purest forms of art because it's literally one person talking, and that's it.
Right.
There's no special effects. There's no music.
There's no instruments. Right, exactly.
Nothing, it's just a human being talking. And
unless you're Andrew Dice Clay.
Or Carrot Top.
Or Carrot Top.
Or Andy Kaufman.
Yes, well, he took it to somewhere.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Amazing,
it's an amazing art form, and there's been so many, just legends from the beginning. From people who changed the idea of stand-up, like Lenny Bruce and guys like George Carlin, and then and Richard Pryor. You have that that whole scene there, and then we have. Just so many outrageous characters from the 80s and 90s, and it's just such a. You're right, Billy. It's it's a really impressive art form, and it's something that I think we'll have a lot of fun talking about in the next couple of weeks. I'm sure we'll be able to sit back and chew on some of our favorites. Hopefully, we get to turn each other on to some guys that maybe we're not even aware of, which would be really cool.
Tom. Did you pick this topic in particular because, you just said it's sort of near and dear to your heart. I just wanted to know a little bit more about why stand-up comedy, why you chose to dedicate a show or a couple of shows to it.
Yeah, it's just something really different. I think that I was watching some, some stuff recently, some stand-up, and it just it occurred to me that there were many, many movies that, are about stand-up comedy. The three that we're doing the next 3 weeks, there were just so many more that I could have thrown out there. I tried to do something a little bit different with the Frank Whaley thing, because it's such an unknown film. The King of Comedy, of course, was a decision made because we've never even talked about Martin Scorsese on this show, which is just crazy. And the newer film is just something I thought would be great because I thought that the film would get into more of a darkness, that these guys go through, which, we'll talk about obviously in a few minutes. But it's just something that's been with me since I was a kid. Staying up New Year's Eve, watching HBO all night, all night. They would just run show after show from like 9 p.m. to like 6 o'clock in the morning. And, when you're 9-10 years old watching that, at first you're just watching it for the profanity. But after a few more years, you really start to get into the ideas behind each and every one of these guys and what they're about and how they see the world. And the fact that, we laugh because we're making this we're both realizing something with the comedian. It's like we both know this, and he's saying it for you, or he or she is saying it for you. And I think that's just a beautiful, beautiful sharing of energy.
Awesome, man. Very cool. Well, it's a great topic. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Awesome.
And happy to discuss Misery Loves Comedy.
Let's do it.
He's a mysterious cyborg who won't stop boasting about his brand new backyard bubble tub. A chemical zombie who just had a bionic eyeball installed in his skull. No joke. Lock up your Latin daughters, for Adam's shoulder, a.k.a. the Counselor, has arrived.
In 1993, my good friend, Stefan Marks, approached me with an idea. But first, a little bit of backstory. Stefan is an award-winning playwright and director who has penned and staged around 20 productions in the 25-plus years I've known him. He's been gracious